It was a typical Tuesday morning when Robert Collins rushed out of his house, keys jingling in his hand. The 38-year-old insurance agent was already running 20 minutes late for an important client meeting. His face showed clear signs of stress as he hurriedly buckled his son, Tommy, into the back seat of his blue sedan. "Daddy's in a big hurry today, buddy," Robert said, glancing at his watch for the third time in 2 minutes. "We need to get you to preschool super fast." Tommy nodded sleepily, clutching his dinosaur lunchbox. At 4 years old, he was a bright-eyed child with his father's brown hair and his mother's curious nature. Unlike his father, Tommy was in no rush this morning. Robert backed out of the driveway with a screech of tires that made Mrs. Peterson from next door look up from watering her flowers. She shook her head disapprovingly as Robert waved a quick apology before speeding down the street. "The traffic is so bad today," Robert muttered, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel as they hit the third red light in a row. Each passing minute made him more anxious. His boss had warned him about being late again, and this client was worth a significant commission that Robert desperately needed. When they approached the busy intersection of Maple and Oak Street, Robert saw the yellow light and made a split-second decision. Instead of slowing down, he pressed harder on the gas pedal. The light turned red just as his car entered the intersection. "Red means stop, Daddy," Tommy said from the back seat, his voice small but certain. Robert barely heard his son's words as blue and red lights flashed in his rearview mirror. A police cruiser that had been parked near the intersection pulled out behind him, siren wailing briefly to signal Robert to pull over. "Not today, please not today," Robert groaned, pulling to the side of the road. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his wallet. Officer Martinez approached the driver's side window with a stern expression. She was a veteran police officer who had seen every excuse in the book. "License and registration, please," she said, noticing the small boy in the back seat. Her expression softened slightly, but her professional demeanor remained firm. "I know I shouldn't have gone through that light, officer," Robert began, his voice apologetic yet rushed. "I'm extremely late for an important meeting and—" "Do you know how dangerous that was, sir?" Officer Martinez cut him off. "You had your child in the car while running a red light at a major intersection." Robert lowered his eyes, shame washing over him. "You're right. I'm sorry." While the officer wrote up the ticket, Tommy watched curiously from his car seat. "Are you a superhero?" he asked the officer, his eyes wide with wonder. Officer Martinez smiled. "Not exactly, little man. Just someone who helps keep people safe." As she handed Robert the ticket, she explained that this violation required a mandatory court appearance due to the dangerous nature of the offense. The date was set for 3 weeks later. "This isn't just a fine, Mr. Collins," she explained. "You'll need to appear before Judge Wilson. He takes these matters very seriously, especially with children involved." Robert nodded, accepting the ticket with a sinking feeling in his stomach. This was more serious than he had expected. After Officer Martinez returned to her cruiser, Robert sat motionless for a moment, staring at the ticket. "Are we in trouble, Daddy?" Tommy asked, picking up on his father's distress. "No, buddy," Robert replied, forcing a smile. "Daddy just made a mistake. We'll fix it." What Robert didn't know as he pulled back into traffic, driving carefully now, was that this simple traffic violation would be the thread that would unravel his carefully constructed life, and his 4-year-old son would be the one to pull it. 3 weeks passed quickly, and Robert grew more anxious as his court date approached. The morning of the hearing, his wife Lisa was supposed to watch Tommy, but she called with bad news. "I'm so sorry, Rob, but I can't get out of this meeting," Lisa had explained over the phone. "You'll have to take Tommy with you to court." Robert paced around the kitchen, running his free hand through his hair. "You know I can't bring a 4-year-old to traffic court. What am I supposed to do with him during the hearing?" "It's just traffic court," Lisa said. "Bring his coloring books and snacks. He'll be fine for an hour." Robert had no choice. That morning, he dressed Tommy in his neatest clothes, small khaki pants and a button-up shirt that made the boy look like a miniature businessman. Robert himself wore his best suit, hoping to make a good impression on Judge Wilson. "Where are we going today, Daddy?" Tommy asked as Robert helped him tie his shoes. "Remember when the police officer gave Daddy a ticket? We'd have to go talk to a judge about it," Robert explained simply. Tommy's eyes widened. "A real judge like on TV? With the hammer thing?" "Yes, A gavel, Robert corrected him. But you need to be very quiet in the courtroom. No talking unless someone asks you a question. Can you do that for Daddy? Tommy nodded solemnly, though his excitement was clear in his bouncing steps as they walked to the car. The courthouse was busy that morning. Robert and Tommy sat in the back row of the crowded courtroom, waiting for Robert's case to be called. Tommy was surprisingly well behaved, quietly coloring in his dinosaur book while occasionally looking up at the proceedings with curious eyes. Docket number 47,291, Collins, Robert. Running a red light with a minor in the vehicle, the court clerk announced after nearly an hour of waiting. Robert's stomach tightened as he stood up. "Come on, Tommy," he whispered, taking his son's hand. They walked to the front of the courtroom where Judge Wilson sat looking down from his bench. The judge was an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through Robert. "Mr. Collins, you're charged with running a red light with a child in your vehicle. How do you plead?" Judge Wilson asked, glancing briefly at Tommy. "Guilty, Your Honor," Robert replied, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I made a terrible mistake that day, and I deeply regret it." Judge Wilson nodded, reviewing the ticket information. "Officer Martinez notes that this occurred at the intersection of Maple and Oak, one of the busiest in our city. Mr. Collins, do you understand the danger you put yourself, your child, and others in?" "Yes, Your Honor. I was late for work and made a poor decision. It won't happen again," Robert promised. The judge seemed to consider this, then noticed Tommy looking up at him with wide, curious eyes. "And who do we have here?" Judge Wilson asked, his stern expression softening slightly. "This is my son, Tommy, Your Honor. He's 4 years old. My wife couldn't watch him today," Robert explained apologetically. Judge Wilson leaned forward slightly. "Hello there, young man. Do you know why your father is here today?" Tommy nodded enthusiastically. "Because he drove through a red light when the nice police lady said we should stop. Red means stop," he recited proudly. The courtroom chuckled softly, and even Judge Wilson smiled. "That's right. Your son seems to understand the rules of the road better than you did that day, Mr. Collins." Robert nodded, embarrassed but relieved that Tommy was behaving so well. He didn't notice how Tommy was studying the judge's robe and gavel with growing fascination. "Your Honor," Robert began, "I take full responsibility for my actions and—" "Daddy," Tommy suddenly interrupted, tugging on Robert's sleeve. "Is this the same kind of judge that would be mad about the special money machine in our basement, the one you said was a secret?" The courtroom fell silent. Robert's face drained of color as Judge Wilson's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "I'm sorry, what did you say, young man?" the judge asked, leaning forward with sudden interest. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Robert stood frozen beside his son, his mind racing to find a way to explain Tommy's innocent comment. Judge Wilson's piercing gaze moved from the curious 4-year-old to his suddenly pale father. "Young man," Judge Wilson said, his voice gentle but firm as he addressed Tommy, "what kind of money machine does your daddy have in the basement?" Tommy beamed, happy to have the important judge's attention. "It's super big with lots of buttons. Daddy says it makes special money that looks just like real money, but we can't tell anyone 'cause it's a big secret." He lowered his voice to a stage whisper that everyone in the courtroom could hear. "Daddy says he could go to jail if people find out." Robert laughed nervously, placing his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Kids and their imaginations, Your Honor. You must be talking about the board game we played last weekend. Monopoly, you know, with the play money." Judge Wilson's expression remained neutral, but his eyes had hardened. He gestured to the bailiff who stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may," Robert said quickly, "about my traffic violation." "Mr. Collins," Judge Wilson interrupted, "we're going to take a short recess in your case." He turned to the bailiff. "Please ask District Attorney Patel to join us in my chambers immediately. And Officer Reynolds, would you mind keeping Mr. Collins company in the courtroom?" A uniformed officer stepped forward and positioned himself near Robert and Tommy. The judge stood and disappeared through a door behind the bench. "Daddy, why does that police officer need to stay with us?" Tommy asked, looking confused. "It's okay, buddy," Robert whispered, though his shaking hands suggested otherwise. He guided Tommy back to their seats in the first row, feeling the stares of everyone else in the courtroom. 20 minutes passed before the judge returned, followed by a serious-looking woman in a dark suit who sat at the prosecutor's table. Judge Wilson called the court back to order. "Mr. Collins, this is District Attorney Patel," Judge Wilson explained. "Based on information that has come to light, I'm ordering a continuance in your traffic case." DA Patel stood up. "Your Honor, the state would like to request that Mr. Collins remain in the courthouse while we process paperwork for a search warrant for his residence." Robert jumped to his feet. "This is ridiculous. You can't get a search warrant based on something a 4-year-old said about a board game." "Sit down, Mr. Collins," Judge Wilson ordered firmly. "Nobody is taking action based solely on your son's statement. However, it is sufficient cause for further inquiry, especially given your reaction." Robert sank back into his seat, his mind spinning. He glanced at his phone, wondering if he could warn Lisa, but Officer Reynolds was watching him too closely. "Officer Reynolds will escort you to a waiting area," Judge Wilson continued. "Ms. Martinez from Child Protective Services is on her way to sit with your son while we sort this out." As if on cue, a kind-faced woman entered the courtroom and approached them. She knelt down to Tommy's level. "Hi there, Tommy. My name is Ms. Martinez. Would you like to come with me to a room with toys and books while your daddy talks with these people?" Tommy looked uncertainly at his father. "It's okay, buddy," Robert said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Go with the nice lady. I'll come get you soon." As Tommy walked away with Ms. Martinez, he turned back. "Daddy, are you in trouble because of the money machine? You said it was a secret." Robert couldn't answer. His world was collapsing around him. Officer Reynolds placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "This way, sir," the officer directed, leading Robert to a small conference room. Through the window, Robert watched as 2 police officers hurried out of the courthouse, undoubtedly heading to his house with the search warrant DA Patel was preparing. In that moment, he realized his carefully constructed life of secrets was about to be exposed, all because of a red light violation and the innocent words of his 4-year-old son. In the quiet of the conference room, Robert buried his face in his hands. The traffic ticket, once his biggest worry, now seemed laughably small compared to what was coming. Lisa Collins was in the middle of a client presentation when her phone buzzed for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Annoyed, she excused herself and stepped into the hallway to check the messages. 6 missed calls from the courthouse and a text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Officer Blake. Please come to your residence immediately regarding an urgent matter." Her heart dropped. Robert and Tommy were supposed to be at traffic court. What could have happened? 20 minutes later, Lisa pulled into her driveway to find 3 police cars parked outside her home. Neighbors peeked through windows and stood on porches, watching as officers moved in and out of the Collins front door. "Ma'am, are you Lisa Collins?" A female detective approached as Lisa stepped out of her car. "Yes, what's going on? Where are my husband and son?" Lisa demanded, her voice shaking. "Your son is safe at the courthouse with Child Protective Services. Your husband is being detained while we execute this search warrant," the detective explained, handing Lisa a document. Lisa scanned the paper, her confusion turning to shock as she read the words "suspected counterfeiting operation" and "basement premises." "This must be a mistake," Lisa insisted. "Robert works in insurance. We don't have anything illegal in our house." The detective's expression remained professional but sympathetic. "Ma'am, we're currently searching your basement. Did you know what was down there?" "Of course I know what's in my own basement," Lisa snapped. "Storage boxes, Robert's workout equipment, the furnace." "Mrs. Collins, when was the last time you went into the basement?" the detective interrupted. Lisa paused, thinking. A few months ago, maybe. Robert handles the laundry and anything else down there. He said the stairs were too steep for me to manage while I was pregnant with Tommy, and I guess we just kept that arrangement." Even as she spoke, Lisa realized how strange it sounded. "Would you like to see what we found?" the detective asked gently. On shaky legs, Lisa followed the detective through her own home and down the basement stairs. The space looked nothing like she remembered. The storage area had been converted into what looked like a small factory. A large printing press sat in one corner. Tables lined the walls, covered with cutting equipment, what appeared to be special paper, and various chemicals. In another section, a computer set up with multiple screens displayed what looked like bank account information. What is all this? Lisa whispered, her world spinning. Mrs. Collins, your husband appears to have been running a sophisticated counterfeiting operation, the detective explained. We found evidence of not just counterfeit bills but also forged identification documents and credit cards. Lisa sank onto the bottom step, her legs no longer able to support her. I had no idea, she murmured. How could I not know this was happening in my own house? It's not uncommon for family members to be unaware, the detective said. People like your husband become experts at compartmentalizing their lives. As Lisa tried to process this information, another officer called out from across the room. Detective Rivera, you need to see this. The detective excused herself and walked over to where the officer was examining a hidden safe they discovered behind a false wall. Inside were stacks of what appeared to be genuine $100 bills, multiple passports with Robert's photo but different names, and a small notebook filled with what looked like customer information. Lisa watched in horror as her husband's secret life was laid bare before her eyes. How could the man she'd been married to for 8 years, the father of her child, have been living this double life? All those late nights he claimed to be working overtime, the unexpected bonuses he said came from special insurance sales programs, it had all been lies. Mrs. Collins, Detective Rivera said, returning to where Lisa sat stunned on the stairs, we'll need you to come to the station to answer some questions. Do you have someone who can be with you? Lisa nodded numbly, thinking of her sister who lived nearby. As she followed the detective back upstairs, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen to Tommy now. In just a few hours, their perfect family life had shattered. All because Robert ran a red light and their 4-year-old son innocently told the truth. Back at the courthouse, Robert sat in the small interrogation room, his hands fidgeting nervously on the table. The clock on the wall showed that almost 3 hours had passed since Tommy's innocent revelation. Detective Morgan, a stern-faced man with 20 years of experience, entered the room carrying a manila folder. Mr. Collins, Detective Morgan began, placing the folder on the table, I just got a call from the team at your house. They found quite an impressive setup in your basement. Robert's shoulders slumped. There was no point denying it anymore. How much trouble am I in? He asked quietly. That depends on how cooperative you're willing to be, Detective Morgan replied, opening the folder to reveal photos of the counterfeiting equipment. Right now, we're looking at federal charges for counterfeiting currency, identity theft, fraud, and possibly money laundering. The Secret Service has been notified, and their agents are on their way. Robert closed his eyes briefly. What about Tommy? And Lisa? Your son is still with Child Protective Services. He's doing fine, playing with toys and having a snack last I heard. Your wife is at the police station, answering questions. The detective leaned forward. She seems genuinely shocked by all this. Was she involved? No, Robert said firmly, his first straightforward answer that day. Lisa knew nothing about it. I made sure of that. Meanwhile, in a brightly colored room down the hall, Tommy sat at a small table coloring a picture of a dinosaur. Ms. Martinez from CBS watched him while talking quietly with Judge Wilson, who had stopped by to check on the boy. He seems remarkably calm considering the circumstances, the judge observed. Children are resilient, Ms. Martinez replied. He knows something serious is happening, but he doesn't understand the implications. He keeps asking when he can see his daddy again. Tommy looked up at the mention of his father. Is my daddy in trouble because of the money machine? He told me it was a special secret. Judge Wilson approached the table and sat in the small chair opposite Tommy. Did your daddy talk about his secret a lot? Tommy shook his head. Only sometimes. When I found him in the basement one night, I was supposed to be sleeping, but I heard noises and went downstairs. He continued coloring, adding green spikes to his dinosaur's back. Daddy said it was a special machine that helped our family have nice things, but nobody could know about it, especially not Mommy. Ms. Martinez exchanged glances with the judge. Both recognized the classic signs of how criminals often manipulate children into keeping secrets. You didn't do anything wrong by telling us, Tommy, Judge Wilson assured him. Sometimes grown-ups keep bad secrets, and it's good when children tell the truth. Across town at the police station, Lisa sat in another interview room, still trying to process the devastating revelations about her husband. Mrs. Collins, did you ever question where the money came from? Detective Rivera asked gently. Lisa wiped tears from her eyes. Robert told me he was doing well at work. Last year he said he got a promotion that came with a big raise. He handled all our finances, paid the bills, managed our accounts. I trusted him completely. She looked up with red-rimmed eyes. How could I have been so blind? Criminals like your husband count on that trust, the detective explained. They compartmentalize their lives very effectively. What happens now? Lisa asked. To Robert? To us. Your husband will likely face federal charges. As for you and Tommy, assuming the investigation confirms you weren't involved, you'll need to prepare for significant changes. Detective Rivera's voice softened. Financial accounts may be frozen during the investigation. Assets purchased with illegal funds could be seized. It's going to be challenging. Lisa nodded slowly, her mind already racing to figure out how she would support herself and Tommy. The comfortable life they'd known, the beautiful house, Tommy's private press school, their new SUV. It was all built on counterfeit money and lies. Back in the interrogation room, Robert finally asked the question that had been haunting him. Can I see my son before they take me away? Detective Morgan studied him for a moment. That's not my decision to make. But I should warn you, the way things are looking, it might be a very long time before you see your son outside of a visiting room. 2 weeks after Robert's arrest, Lisa sat across from attorney Sarah Patel in the lawyer's downtown office. Outside the window, rain pelted against the glass, matching Lisa's gloomy mood. The prosecutor is offering a deal, Sarah explained, sliding a document across the desk. In exchange for Robert's full cooperation, names of contacts, details of the operation, and testimony against his suppliers. They'll recommend 15 years instead of 25. Lisa stared at the paper, still struggling to reconcile the Robert she thought she knew with the criminal who had hidden his activities for years. 15 years, she whispered. Tommy will be 19 when his father gets out. It's the best offer we're likely to get, Lisa. The evidence against him is overwhelming. The Secret Service agents said his counterfeiting operation was one of the most sophisticated they've seen from an individual. The quality of the bills, the fake IDs, the credit card fraud, Robert knew exactly what he was doing. Lisa nodded slowly. She had spent the past 2 weeks learning things about her husband that still felt impossible to believe. The federal agents had shown her records indicating Robert's illegal activities had been going on for nearly 5 years, most of their marriage. Have you told Tommy yet? Sarah asked gently. How do you explain something like this to a 4-year-old? Lisa's voice cracked. I told him Daddy made some bad choices and has to stay away for a while. He keeps asking when Daddy's coming home. Across town at the Federal Detention Center, Robert sat in an orange jumpsuit, waiting for his lawyer to arrive with news of the plea deal. His cellmate, a man named Carlos who was awaiting trial for bank fraud, sat on the lower bunk reading a tattered paperback. You got visitors today? Carlos asked, not looking up from his book. Robert shook his head. Lisa said she's not ready. Can't say I blame her. What about your kid? The one who busted you? Robert winced at the reminder. Among the inmates, his story had become something of a dark joke, the master counterfeiter undone by his press schooler's innocent comment. Tommy's not allowed to visit yet. They're still evaluating what's best for him. The truth was more painful than Robert wanted to admit. The child psychologist working with Tommy had recommended against visits for now, concerned about the confusion and trauma it might cause. Lisa had forwarded a drawing Tommy made, a stick figure family standing in front of a house, with one figure behind what appeared to be bars. The simple image had kept Robert awake for 3 nights straight. Meanwhile, in a small apartment across town that Lisa had rented after being forced to move out of their house, which was now government property due to asset forfeiture laws, Tommy was helping his mother unpack boxes from their old life. Can I put Mr. Snuggles on my new bed? He asked, clutching his favorite teddy bear. Of course, sweetie, Lisa replied, trying to keep her voice cheerful despite their circumstances. Tommy placed the bear carefully on his bed, then looked around the small bedroom that was nothing like his old one with its race car bed and wall of toys. Most of his possessions were gone now, either seized as evidence or sold to pay for lawyer fees. Mommy, when are we going back to our real house? Tommy asked, the innocent question hitting Lisa like a physical blow. She sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled him close. This is our home now, Tommy. Remember how I explained that Daddy did some things that weren't right? Because of that, we had to find a new place to live. Tommy nodded solemnly. Because of the money machine in the basement. The one that was a secret. That's right, honey. But I told the secret, Tommy said quietly, looking down at his small hands. And now Daddy's gone, and we had to leave our house. Is it my fault? Lisa felt her heart breaking all over again. She turned Tommy to face her, looking directly into his eyes. No, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. What Daddy was doing was wrong, and telling the truth is always the right thing to do, even when it's hard. Tommy seemed to consider this, his young mind working to understand concepts far beyond his years. Will we be okay without Daddy? Lisa pulled him into a tight hug, linking back tears. Yes, Tommy, we'll be okay. Things will be different, but we'll figure it out together. 6 months after Robert's arrest, the Collins case finally went to trial. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as journalists and curious onlookers filled the gallery. The case had attracted significant media attention. The story of a counterfeiter exposed by his 4-year-old son had captured public imagination. Lisa sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, dressed in a simple navy blue dress she had bought at a thrift store. Her sister Karen sat beside her, holding her hand for support. The past half-year had been a crash course in survival for Lisa. She had found a job as a receptionist at a dental office, enrolled in night classes to earn an accounting certificate, and learned to navigate the complex world of social services to help make ends meet. Judge Harriet Donovan entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. She was known for her fairness, but also for her tough sentences in white-collar crime cases. Robert, looking thinner in his suit that now hung loosely on his frame, stood beside his attorney as the judge took her seat. The United States versus Robert Collins, the clerk announced, officially beginning the proceedings. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Robert had ultimately rejected the plea deal, insisting on a trial. His attorney had advised against it, but Robert couldn't face the thought of 15 years away from Tommy. It was a gamble that most legal experts considered foolish. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney James Wilson, delivered a powerful opening statement. He walked the jury through the sophisticated counterfeiting operation, showing photographs of the equipment found in the Collins basement and examples of the nearly perfect fake bills Robert had produced. Ladies and gentlemen, Wilson concluded, the defendant didn't just print fake money. He built an entire false life that victimized not only the businesses and individuals who received his counterfeit currency, but also his own wife and child, who believed they were living an honest life. Robert's attorney, Martin Green, tried his best to present a defense, arguing that Robert had been driven by desperation after losing his job 3 years earlier, a fact he had hidden from Lisa out of shame. According to Green, Robert had initially only intended to create enough fake money to tide the family over until he found new employment, but the scheme had grown beyond his control. My client made terrible choices, Green admitted to the jury, but he made them out of love for his family, not out of greed or malice. The trial lasted for 3 days. Lisa testified about her complete ignorance of her husband's activities, describing her shock and heartbreak upon discovering the truth. Several Secret Service agents detailed the extent and sophistication of Robert's operation. Financial experts explained how the counterfeit money had been circulated, causing harm to businesses and individuals who had unknowingly accepted it. Robert himself took the stand on the final day against his lawyer's advice. He spoke directly to the jury, his voice sometimes breaking with emotion. I can't undo what I've done, he said. I started with a simple lie, telling my wife I still had a job when I'd been laid off. That lie led to another and another until I was living an entirely false life. I convinced myself I was doing it for my family, but the truth is, I was too proud to admit failure. He turned toward Lisa in the gallery. I betrayed my wife's trust. I taught my son that secrets and lies were acceptable. I can never make that right. As the jury filed up to begin deliberations, Lisa felt an unexpected wave of pity for Robert. Despite everything, he was still Tommy's father, still the man she had once loved enough to marry. The jury returned after just 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Judge Donovan set the sentencing hearing for the following month, and Robert was led away in handcuffs, casting one last glance at Lisa before disappearing through the courtroom door. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters thrust microphones toward Lisa, shouting questions. Her sister Karen tried to shield her, but Lisa paused and faced the cameras. "All I want now is to rebuild a stable, honest life for my son," she said simply. "Tommy deserves that much." #PA. 5 years passed since Robert Collins began serving his 12-year sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Petersburg, Virginia. Judge Donovan had shown unexpected mercy at the sentencing, considering the complexity of the counterfeiting operation, giving him 3 years less than the minimum recommendation. On a bright Saturday morning in June, Lisa drove her now 9-year-old son along the familiar 2-hour route to the prison. Tommy sat quietly in the back seat, a handheld video game forgotten on his lap as he watched the countryside roll by. These monthly visits had become part of their routine, though they never became easier. "Do you think Dad will like my science fair medal?" Tommy asked, touching the bronze medal in his pocket. "You'll be very proud," Lisa assured him. She glanced at her son in the rearview mirror. Tommy had grown into a thoughtful, serious boy with an uncanny memory and a strong sense of right and wrong. The prison psychologist said these traits were likely influenced by his early experience with his father's crimes and the aftermath. The prison visiting room was crowded with families when they arrived. Robert was already waiting at one of the small tables. At 43, his hair had begun to gray at the temples and prison life had hardened his once soft features, but his eyes still lit up at the sight of his son. "There's my science champion," Robert called as Tommy rushed over for a careful hug, mindful of the strict rules about physical contact. Lisa followed more slowly, offering Robert a polite smile. "I got 3rd place in the whole school," Tommy explained, showing his medal. "My project was about how counterfeiting is detected by special pens and machines. Ms. Wilson said it was very educational." Robert's smile faltered slightly. Despite their best efforts to shield Tommy from the details of the case, children at school had taunted him about his criminal dad when the story resurfaced during their 3rd-grade current events discussion. Tommy had responded by learning everything he could about counterfeiting, turning his father's crime into an educational opportunity. "That's impressive, buddy. Really smart thinking," Robert said, ruffling Tommy's hair. While Tommy told his father about school and soccer practice, Lisa observed the interaction quietly. She had forgiven Robert years ago, not for his sake, but for her own and Tommy's. The bitterness would have consumed her otherwise. They had even developed a friendly co-parenting relationship, with Robert providing guidance and support from behind bars. "How's the new job going?" Robert asked Lisa when Tommy took a bathroom break. "It's good. The accounting degree finally paid off," Lisa replied. "The bank manager says I might be up for promotion next year." There was a certain irony in Lisa working at a bank after everything that had happened, but she had discovered she had a talent for numbers and financial systems. Her experience as a victim of financial crime gave her unique insight that her employers valued. "And the house? Any more problems with the plumbing?" Robert asked. "All fixed now. My dad helped with the repairs." Lisa had managed to buy a small 3-bedroom house last year, a milestone that had seemed impossible in the dark days after Robert's arrest. When Tommy returned, they played a board game the prison provided, laughing together almost like a normal family. But as visiting hours drew to a close, the reality of their situation returned. 7 more years, Robert said quietly as they prepared to leave. "I know it's still a long time, but I'll be there for his high school graduation, Lisa, I promise." Lisa nodded. "They'll be waiting for you. We both will, in our way." On the drive home, Tommy was unusually quiet, staring out the window at the passing landscape. "You okay, sweetie?" Lisa asked. "Mom, do you think Dad would have gotten caught if I hadn't said anything about the money machine that day in court?" Lisa took a deep breath. This question surfaced occasionally as Tommy grew older and understood more. Eventually, yes. What Dad was doing was wrong, and wrong things usually come to light sooner or later. Tommy considered this, but I'm the one who told the secret. "You told the truth, Tommy. That's never wrong," Lisa said firmly. "Sometimes the truth is hard and changes things in ways we didn't expect. But living honestly is always better than living a lie, even when it seems easier to keep secrets." Tommy nodded slowly. "I think I understand." As they pulled into their driveway, their neighbor Mrs. Jenkins waved from her garden. Their small community had embraced them, despite knowing their history. It had taken time, but Lisa and Tommy had built a new life. One based on truth, resilience, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from starting over.